She had been watching the clock more than she had been watching her client. That was the first thing Marcus Chen noticed when he walked through the glass doors of Hartwell Private Wealth Management on a Tuesday morning in October. The woman behind the polished reception desk glancing at her watch with the particular impatience of someone who has already made a decision about the person standing in front of her, and that decision has nothing to do with what that person has actually said or done. It is a judgment rendered on sight alone, immediate and total, the way certain people have of sorting the world into categories before the world has had any chance to introduce itself properly. Her name tag read Diana in clean capital letters. Her expression communicated something considerably less professional than that clean typography suggested. Marcus was wearing a gray jacket that had seen a respectable number of Tuesdays. Not because he couldn't afford something newer. He simply hadn't thought about it that morning, and he rarely thought about such things on mornings when he had actual work occupying his attention. He had driven to Hartwell's downtown building through 40 minutes of October traffic, with his mind arranged around a set of financial projections that his team at ClearPath Financial Architecture had sent over the previous evening, annotated in the margins with questions from his business partner, David, that Marcus intended to address before noon. His company had just completed a 14-month infrastructure financing project for a consortium of 6 regional investment funds, a contract that had required 2 separate legal clearance processes and the patience of everyone involved, and the final wire transfer, the one that had sat in escrow for 3 weeks while the clearance paperwork moved through its final stages, had arrived in Marcus's primary account 3 days earlier. He was here at Hartwell because his accountant, Elaine Moss, had specifically recommended their private wealth division for a category of tax-advantaged portfolio restructuring that his current banking arrangement wasn't structured to handle. It was, in Marcus's own framing of it, a practical visit, a routine errand among other errands. He had an appointment confirmed by email at 3:17 the previous afternoon with a senior advisor named Gerald Whitmore. What Marcus did not know, what he had no reason to suspect standing in the marble-floored lobby with his leather portfolio under one arm, was that Gerald Whitmore had received a family emergency call the previous evening and had left the city by 9 o'clock that night. He had not notified the scheduling desk. He had not sent his client an email, a phone call, or a text message of any kind. He had simply gone, leaving a 9:10 appointment floating in the calendar like a ship whose anchor line had been quietly cut. And what Diana at the reception desk did not know, what she had entirely failed to consider in her rapid, practiced sorting of the man who had just come through the glass doors, was precisely who she was about to dismiss. If you have ever walked into a room and felt the weight of being assessed before you have spoken a single word, felt yourself found wanting by eyes that haven't yet bothered to ask a question, then you already understand something essential about what the next several hours held for Marcus Chen. And if you have ever carried, quietly and without display, a fact about yourself that would have made those assessing eyes recalibrate entirely, then you understand why those hours in the final accounting mattered very little to Marcus himself, but they mattered enormously to Hartwell Private Wealth Management. Before this story reaches its end, you will understand exactly how much and exactly why. If you are new here, take a moment right now to hit that like button and subscribe, because this is a space where we tell stories about the kind of patience that most people mistake for passivity and discover, too late, is something altogether different. Drop your city in the comments as well. This community stretches across more places than you might expect, and it genuinely means something to know where you are. Marcus arrived at the reception desk at 9:07, 3 minutes ahead of his appointment. He had a quiet, long-standing habit of arriving slightly early, not to create an impression, not to position himself favorably, but simply because he had decided years ago that punctuality was one of the most basic forms of respect available to him, a way of saying to another person that their time was as real and as finite as his own. He extended this courtesy even when, as he would discover over the next several hours, it was not extended in return. "Good morning," he said. "I have a 9:10 appointment with Gerald Whitmore. My name is Marcus Chen." Diana's eyes moved to her screen with the slow, deliberate pace of a person performing the appearance of busyness rather than actually experiencing it. She typed something. She scrolled. She tilted her head with the theatrical concern of someone about to deliver news they do not personally regret. "Mr. Whitmore isn't in today," she said. Marcus absorbed this without visible reaction. "I received a confirmation email yesterday afternoon," he replied, keeping his voice level. "I see the appointment on the system," Diana said, with a tone that drew a clear and unbothered distinction between seeing a thing and feeling any obligation to honor it. "But Mr. Whitmore is unavailable. I can see if someone else is free to help you." "That would be helpful," Marcus said. "Thank you." Diana lifted the phone receiver and made a call that lasted approximately 40 seconds. She replaced it with the practiced expression of someone for whom the delivery of mild disappointment has become entirely routine. "Our advisors are with clients right now. If you'd like to take a seat, we'll get someone over to you as soon as possible." Marcus nodded. He walked to the seating area, a thoughtfully arranged constellation of cream leather chairs around a low glass table bearing a fanned array of financial publications, their covers heavy with the vocabulary of serious money. And he sat down. He placed his leather portfolio on the table beside him, removed his phone from his jacket pocket, and opened the document file his team had sent the night before. He was not performing patience. He was not staging a dignified protest. He simply had work that needed doing, and a waiting room was as functional a place to do it as any other. What he did not yet know was that Diana had made a second call after he settled into his chair, not to locate an available advisor, but to her colleague Pamela Reeves, who managed the private client intake floor on the level above. The substance of that call, reconstructed several weeks later from Pamela's own careful account of events, was approximately this. There was a walk-in downstairs claiming to have an appointment with Whitmore. He didn't look like a private wealth client. He was probably a referral from the community banking side, or possibly a small business owner who had been directed here by a well-meaning branch manager without understanding quite what tier of service this office handled. No urgency, no rush, no rush. Marcus sat in that cream leather chair for 1 hour and 17 minutes before a single person spoke to him again. When someone finally did, it was not an advisor. It was a young associate named Theo, perhaps 26, with the slight apologetic energy of someone who had clearly drawn the short straw in whatever brief negotiation had just occurred upstairs. He appeared at the edge of the waiting area, introduced himself in a voice that was careful and genuine, confirmed that Marcus was still waiting, and asked whether he could bring him anything. Marcus asked for coffee, with the sincere appreciation of a man who had been awake since 5:30 and had not had a second cup, and Theo produced a small, relieved smile and disappeared to find one. "Is there an estimated wait time?" Marcus asked, before Theo had fully turned away. Theo hesitated in the precise way people hesitate when the honest answer is embarrassing. "Let me check on that for you," he said, and disappeared. He did not return with an answer. He returned 20 minutes later with the coffee. It was good coffee, delivered in a proper cup on a small saucer, and Marcus thanked him with a warmth that was genuine and that Theo seemed to receive with something close to relief, as though the simple courtesy of it had been unexpected. Marcus drank the coffee and continued working. The lobby of Hartwell Private Wealth Management was a space that had been designed with considerable investment and care to deliver a single clear message to everyone who entered it. This is where serious money lives, and you are in its presence. The floors were Italian marble in a pale honey tone that caught the morning light and held it warmly. The walls bore abstract paintings in gilded frames, the kind of art acquired for its atmosphere rather than its meaning, chosen to suggest cultivation without demanding engagement. The lighting was indirect and warm, casting everything in the golden suggestion of prosperity settled so deeply into a place that it had become architectural. Above the central atrium, a chandelier of cascading crystal drops gathered the October light that fell through the tall windows and scattered it in small prismatic fragments across the ceiling, so that the space had a gentle, constant shimmer, like standing inside a very well-appointed idea of what money looks like when it has nowhere urgently to be. It was, by any objective measure, a beautiful room. It was also, Marcus had begun to understand, with increasing clarity as the morning progressed, a room from which he was being kept at a deliberate and unacknowledged distance. because the marble and the warm light and the crystal chandelier were not for him. Not today. Today, he was a man in a gray jacket in a cream leather chair, while the actual business of this building moved on soft carpeted floors above him. He watched other clients arrive through those same glass doors and be greeted by name, ushered through the interior glass partition with the easy familiarity of people expected and valued, offered not simply coffee but a presented choice. Coffee or tea or sparkling water, arranged on a small silver tray carried by a staff member who moved with the unhurried attention of someone whose job was to make the preferred feel preferred. Marcus watched all of this with the steady, cataloging attention of a man who has trained himself to observe rather than react, and he noted each detail without hardening it into grievance. He simply saw what was there. He understood what it meant. And he returned to his documents. At 11:42, 2 hours and 35 minutes after he had first approached Diana's desk, a woman descended the central staircase with the unhurried confidence of someone entirely at home in this environment. She was perhaps 45, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse that moved with the quiet authority of good fabric, her dark hair pulled back with the kind of precise neatness that understood grooming as professional vocabulary. Her name was Sloane Hargrove. She was a senior relationship manager at Hartwell, not the person Marcus had been scheduled to see, but someone senior enough that her appearance in the lobby carried its own quiet emphasis. She walked toward him with a smile that had been calibrated, the way people at her level learn to calibrate these things, to deliver the precise right measure of warmth, enough to acknowledge the failure of the morning without quite elevating it to the status of incident. "Mr. Chen," she said, extending her hand with the polished ease of someone for whom this gesture has become both instinct and instrument. "I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting. I'm Sloane Hargrove. If you'd like to follow me, I have a meeting room ready for us." Marcus stood, shook her hand, and gathered his portfolio with the unhurried ease of a man who's been kept waiting and has decided not to perform his feelings about it. "Thank you," he said simply. If Sloane noticed that he did not say "it's fine" or "don't worry about it" or "these things happen," those reflexive verbal cushions that people offer to smooth over the discomfort of others, she gave no indication. But Marcus had understood, a long time before this morning, that absorbing an apology without rushing to exonerate the apologizer was one of the quieter and more honest forms of communication available to him. It cost him nothing. It said everything that needed to be said without a word of confrontation or accusation. The meeting room on the second floor was all glass walls and muted gray upholstery, with a long conference table that could comfortably seat 12 and currently seated 2. Sloane took the opposite position, the slight habitual power positioning of the professional on home ground, opened a leather-bound notepad, and clicked her pen with the crisp readiness of someone shifting from management to actual work. She was good at this. Even in these first moments, Marcus could see it, the quality of attention, the way she organized herself around the conversation rather than around her own impressions of it. "So," she began, with the practiced ease of someone who has opened 1,000 intake conversations and made each one feel like the first. "What brings you in today, Mr. Chen? Are you currently holding accounts with us, or is this a new relationship?" "New," Marcus said. "I was referred by my accountant, Elaine Moss. She recommended Hartwell specifically for a restructuring project." Sloane noted this, her pen moving with efficient precision. "What kind of restructuring are we talking about? Personal investment portfolio, business accounts, retirement planning, some combination?" "A combination," Marcus said. "I have a significant capital sum that arrived recently, the closing payment on a long-term project contract. I'm looking at tax-advantaged reinvestment structures, some allocation toward private equity, and I want to establish a proper wealth management relationship for ongoing work. My company has been growing at a rate that my current arrangements weren't designed to accommodate. I need something that scales with where things are heading." Sloane's pen paused, a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, the hesitation of someone whose professional instincts have just registered something worth attending to. "And roughly what capital sum are we working with? Just a ballpark figure. It helps me understand which of our service tiers would be the right fit for your situation." This was the question, the fulcrum around which the entire morning would rotate, the moment whose answer would reorder everything that had preceded it. Marcus reached into his leather portfolio. He removed a single document, a printed account summary generated from his banking portal, carrying his institution's formal letterhead and the clean, unambiguous authority of official figures presented without commentary. He slid it across the table. Sloane picked it up with the practiced composure of someone who handles financial documents across the full range of human financial circumstance and has learned to receive whatever is on them with professional steadiness. That steadiness lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then she straightened. Not dramatically, not theatrically, simply the involuntary physical recalibration of a person whose body has processed a number before her professional training has had time to intercept it and manage its visible effects. Her spine lengthened, her chin lifted almost imperceptibly. The quality of attention in her face changed in the particular way it changes when someone is shifted, without deciding to, from conducting a meeting to being in one. The document showed a primary account balance of $4,840,000. A secondary operating account for ClearPath Financial Architecture carried an additional $2,200,000. 2 linked investment accounts brought the combined total of liquid and near-liquid holdings to just under $9 million. Before any valuation of the company itself, which Elaine Moss had separately assessed at between $12 and $15 million based on current contract revenues and projected forward growth over the next 3 fiscal years. Sloane set the paper down with the deliberate gentleness of someone handling something that has just acquired a new category of importance. She looked at Marcus across the table, and the quality of that look was entirely different from the look with which she had descended the staircase 19 minutes ago. "Mr. Chen," she said, and there was something in her voice that had shifted register, in the way a room shifts when someone opens a window. The air moving differently, the atmosphere changed by something that cannot quite be named as a single thing. I want to apologize again for the wait this morning. Genuinely. That experience is not what we provide for clients at your level." "At my level," Marcus said quietly. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He simply repeated the phrase back to her, softly and without elaboration, the way you might hold a mirror up to something you want someone else to see without directing their gaze too forcefully. The color in Sloane's cheeks shifted almost imperceptibly. She understood precisely what had just happened. "For any client," she corrected herself, and her voice carried the slight compression of someone absorbing a lesson they have just been given the dignity of receiving privately. "That is not the experience we provide for any client. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen." Marcus nodded. He had said what needed to be said, and he had said it in 6 words, and he had no interest in pressing it any further. He was here to discuss portfolio architecture, not to adjudicate the failures of the morning. That accounting, he had already understood, would take place in its own time and in ways that had nothing to do with anything he needed to manage personally. What followed was 2 hours of substantive, rigorous, and genuinely productive conversation. Sloane, to her considerable credit, was excellent at her job, meticulous, knowledgeable, and attentive in the particular focused way of someone who has abandoned assessment and moved entirely into service. She brought in a portfolio specialist named James, who arrived within 4 minutes of being summoned, and who greeted Marcus with the slightly too vigorous handshake of a man who had been briefed in a hallway and was now recalibrating everything. She outlined 3 distinct structural options for the capital, walked through the tax implications of each with the clarity of someone who understood that her client was not here to be impressed by complexity, but by precision. Before Marcus left the building at 2:15 that afternoon, Sloane had personally initiated a priority onboarding request, a process that normally required 2 to 3 weeks, and had arranged for it to be completed in 72 hours. None of this was purely mechanical. Some of it was because Sloane Hargrove was a professional who understood that how you recover from a failure reveals more about an institution than the failure itself. Marcus gave her credit for that, genuinely. But he did not forget Diana at the reception desk. He did not forget the hour and 17 minutes before anyone spoke to him. He did not forget the way the morning had divided itself with brutal clarity into the treatment he had received before Sloane saw that document and the treatment he received after it. That distinction was not, in Marcus's mind, a wound to be nursed. It was simply information, a data point about the difference between what this institution said it was and what it actually was. He stored it the way he stored all useful information, carefully, without embellishment, in a place where it could be retrieved when it became relevant. It would become relevant. Not that afternoon, and not that week, but soon enough. 2 weeks after his initial visit, Marcus returned to Hartwell to sign the formal onboarding documentation and complete the portfolio transfer paperwork. His appointment was at 10 in the morning. He arrived at 9:55. When he came through the glass doors this time, Diana looked up from the reception desk, and something moved across her expression with the speed and complexity of a weather system. Recognition first, and then a longer, more uncomfortable calculation, the kind your face performs when it is working out what to do with context. It was not expecting to have to manage. She smiled. It was effortful in the specific way of a smile constructed from intention rather than feeling. "Good morning, Mr. Chen. Ms. Hargrove is expecting you. I'll let her know you've arrived right away." "Thank you, Diana," Marcus said. He said her name without emphasis or edge. He had no interest in making her uncomfortable. He simply knew her name because it was on her name tag and he had read it 3 weeks ago, and using it was a form of basic courtesy he extended to everyone. He sat in the same cream leather chair. He was there for exactly 4 minutes before Sloane appeared at the top of the staircase and came down personally to collect him. No waiting, no delay, no intermediary. There was coffee already on the table in the meeting room when they arrived, and a small arrangement of pastries that had not been present during his first visit, and the particular quality of Sloane's attention throughout the meeting was that of someone for whom the lessons of the previous encounter were still very much active. Marcus noticed all of it. He noted it the way an architect notes the structural choices in a building, not to evaluate whether they're decorative or load-bearing, but simply to understand the building's actual logic, and where that logic might, under sufficient pressure, reveal the points at which it had been optimistic about its own strength. The meeting itself was excellent. By the end of it, Marcus had committed the first tranche of capital, $3 million, to a tax-advantaged investment structure that Sloane had designed specifically for his situation, and which reflected a genuine understanding of both his financial position and his strategic priorities. It was good work. He told her so, and he meant it without qualification. It was when the meeting concluded and Sloane walked him back through the building toward the lobby that the next chapter of this story announced itself. Standing near the reception desk, engaged in a low, easy conversation with Diana, and a third person Marcus had not yet encountered, was a man who occupied the room with the specific energy of someone who has long been accustomed to being its most significant presence. He was perhaps 55, broad-shouldered in a way that had once been athletic and had softened into the settled authority of prosperity. His suit was almost certainly bespoke, the kind of fit that cannot be achieved at any price except considerable customization. His watch caught the light in the particular way of something that cost more than most people's cars, and wore that fact with comfortable indifference. His name, Marcus would learn in the following 60 seconds, was Bradford Hartwell, not the firm's founder, but his son and the managing director of the institution that bore their shared name. Bradford turned as Sloane and Marcus reached the base of the stairs. His eyes went to Sloane first, with the ease of long-time familiarity, and then moved to Marcus with the quick, polished assessment of a man who has spent decades sorting people into their correct categories and trusts his own speed doing it. Sloane," Bradford said, his voice carrying the resonant ease of someone who has never had reason to doubt his welcome in any room. "Good timing? Heading out?" "Just finishing up with a client," Sloane said with a slight weight on the last word. Not quite an instruction, but something directional, aimed precisely at Bradford. "Bradford, this is Marcus Chen. He's just completed his onboarding with us." Bradford turned to Marcus with a smile that was correct in every technical specification. The right duration, the right firmness of hand, the right degree of engaged eye contact. But that nevertheless carried, just beneath its polished surface, the faint vibration of a man still relying on the initial assessment his eyes had made before the introduction had fully registered. "Marcus," Bradford said, "good to have you with us. Welcome to the Hartwell family. New to private wealth management, or have you worked with firms like ours before?" The phrase "new to private wealth" was almost casual, almost unconscious, almost the kind of question you might ask anyone. but it carried within it an assumption specific enough that Sloane, standing 2 feet away, closed her eyes for a single fraction of a second, the involuntary response of someone watching a collision they have anticipated and cannot prevent. Marcus held Bradford Hartwell's gaze with the same steady calm he had held throughout a morning spent invisible in a cream leather chair. "I've had private wealth arrangements before," he said. "My previous relationship was in Hong Kong, where I was based for 6 years. When I returned to the States, I needed to establish something here. Your firm was specifically recommended." Bradford's smile maintained its shape, but something behind it recalculated, the almost imperceptible shift of a man who has just realized the terrain is arranged differently from how he'd charted it in the 2 seconds before he opened his mouth. "Hong Kong," he said. "What kind of work kept you there?" "Infrastructure project finance," Marcus said. "I was leading several large-scale sovereign fund deals over there. I started ClearPath when I came back." Bradford's eyes moved briefly to Sloane, just a flicker, the speed reading of a man looking for context, and Sloane returned the look with an expression that compressed a significant amount of information into a small space. "Yes, and we will speak about this later." "Well," Bradford said, recovering with the smooth efficiency of someone whose professional polish is deep enough to function under pressure, "you're in the best possible hands with Sloane. She's extraordinary. We're genuinely glad you chose us." "Thank you," Marcus said. He shook Bradford Hartwell's hand, said goodbye to Sloane, gave Diana a brief and civil nod, and walked out through the glass doors into the October afternoon, where the air had the bright, clean edge that comes in the middle of autumn when the sky is high and the light is clear and the city is going about its serious business without particular ceremony. Behind him, as the doors swung shut, he did not see Bradford Hartwell turn to Sloane with the specific expression of a man who has just arrived somewhat late at a conversation that has already rendered its verdict. He did not see Diana's discomfort as Sloane quietly and efficiently described the events of the first visit. The 2 hours and 35 minutes in the lobby, the misclassification, the way Marcus had sat in that chair with his documents and his coffee, and his absolute refusal to either leave or complain, like a man who had nothing to prove and understood this with perfect clarity. He didn't need to see any of it. He had felt the shape of what was happening. And that was sufficient, the moment that changed things in a more structural and permanent way, not just for Marcus personally, but for Hartwell Private Wealth Management as an institution with ambitions that exceeded its current capabilities, came 4 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon in November, in a 4th-floor conference room, paneled in dark wood that Marcus had never entered before. He was there because Sloane had called him 2 days earlier with a request that she delivered with a carefully modulated casualness that didn't quite conceal its weight. Bradford Hartwell, she explained, would like to meet with Marcus, not in a client capacity, but in an advisory one. ClearPath Financial Architecture's reputation in infrastructure project finance had been the subject of some detailed internal research over the past several weeks. Hartwell's board was actively exploring an expansion into infrastructure-linked alternative investments, and they were, Sloane said, looking for real expertise rather than assembled expertise. They wanted to understand the actual methodology, not a consultant summary of it. They were asking Marcus Chen, the man who had spent nearly 3 hours unnoticed in their lobby, to come back and teach them something they did not know how to do. Marcus had taken 24 hours to consider this before calling Sloane back, not because he was uncertain, but because he treated decisions of consequence with the same unhurried attention he gave to everything else. "Tell Mr. Hartwell I'm happy to have a preliminary conversation," he said. "I want to understand the full scope before committing to anything formal." The 4th-floor conference room was a different order of space from the glass-walled meeting room where he had sat with Sloane. This room was deep in the building's interior, paneled in dark wood that had been there long enough to absorb the institution's history, with an oval table that could seat 14 and a view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that made the outside world feel like a context rather than a distraction. Bradford was already seated when Marcus arrived, alongside Christine Elroy, Hartwell's chief investment officer, who had the clipped precision of someone for whom every word is a considered expenditure, and a younger man named Patel, who headed their alternative investment strategy group, and who was clearly, from the quality of his preparation, someone who had spent the last 48 hours doing serious work. There was also, at the far end of the table in a junior analyst capacity, Theo, the young associate who had brought Marcus coffee during the long morning in the lobby. When Theo saw Marcus walk in, something moved across his face in quick succession. Recognition, a flash of remembered context, and then a warm, genuine pleasure at the coincidence that he managed, with some effort, to keep at a professionally appropriate volume. Marcus gave him a brief acknowledging nod, and Theo straightened in his chair with the particular bearing of someone who has just been given an unexpected piece of good news. Bradford opened the meeting with the focused efficiency of a man who understood time as a finite resource, at least when it was his own. He outlined Hartwell's strategic interest in infrastructure-linked alternative investments with directness and intelligence. Marcus had expected to have to do more excavation to understand what they actually wanted, but Bradford had clearly prepared, and the preparation was honest. He described the gaps in their current expertise without pretending they were smaller than they were. He indicated, without specifying a figure, that the capital they intended to deploy was substantial. And then he looked across the table at Marcus with an expression that was different from anything Marcus had seen on Bradford Hartwell's face before. Not the managed warmth of someone greeting a client, not the smooth recovery of a man recalibrating after a social miscalculation. This was the direct, undecorated regard of someone who has done serious research and has arrived, through that research, at a specific conclusion about who he is looking at. "We've looked at the consortium project your firm completed earlier this year," Bradford said. "The regional fund infrastructure work, the fee structure, the return profile your clients are tracking against industry benchmarks. It's genuinely impressive. I want to understand how you built the model." "The model's built around patience," Marcus said, with the directness of someone who has said this before and found it to be exactly as simple as it sounds. "Most capital in this space gets deployed faster than the projects can responsibly absorb it. Everyone wants acceleration because acceleration looks like progress. We take a different position. We let the project development cycle set the deployment pace, not the other way around. The returns are there when you allow the structure to develop correctly." Christine Elroy leaned forward with the focused attention of someone who has been waiting for a specific thread to appear. "When you say patience, are we talking 2-year horizons? 5? "Minimum 5, Marcus said. "The strongest projects we've worked on have had 8 to 10-year development arcs before the full return profile materializes. The infrastructure financing space rewards discipline in a way that almost nothing else does, but it punishes impatience with a proportional severity. You have to be genuinely comfortable with the timeline, not just willing to tolerate it." The 3 hours that followed were among the most substantive Marcus had spent in a conference room in recent memory, and he had spent a great deal of time in conference rooms. Christine was formidably rigorous. Her questions had the quality of someone who had identified every weak point in an argument before you finished making it, and who expected you to have already addressed those points in your preparation. Patel had done impressive independent research and brought it with the intellectual honesty of someone more interested in understanding a methodology than in appearing to already understand it. Even Bradford, whose strengths were more strategic than technical, asked the right questions at the right moments, the questions that showed he understood the shape of what was being discussed, even where the specific mathematics exceeded his natural domain. By the time Bradford walked Marcus to the elevator at 6:15 in the evening, with the city outside the tall windows settling into its evening configuration and the lights of other buildings beginning to assert themselves against the deepening dusk, the outlines of a consulting arrangement had taken clear enough shape that both men understood what the next steps would be without needing to articulate every detail. Bradford pressed the call button. He was quiet for a moment, with the particular quality of someone who has something to say that does not fit easily into the register they have been using. "Marcus," he said, "I want to acknowledge something directly." Marcus waited. "Your first visit here. The experience you had in the lobby, the time you spent waiting." Bradford's voice had moved into a register that was neither performed apology nor deflection. It was direct, and it carried the slight stiffness of a man for whom this kind of accountability is not effortless, which is precisely what made it credible. "I've spoken with my team at length. I understand what happened, and I understand that it is not a reflection of what this firm should be. I'm sorry for that experience. Genuinely." Marcus looked at him. He understood the cost of what Bradford had just said, not in vulnerability, exactly, but in the specific effort required of someone accustomed to operating from a position of unquestioned authority, who has had to locate within himself the willingness to account for his institution's failure to a man his institution had failed. "I appreciate you saying that," Marcus said. Bradford held the moment for another beat. "Can I ask you something? When you were sitting down there, working, did you consider leaving?" Marcus considered the question with the honest attention it deserved. "In the first 30 minutes, he said, briefly. And then I thought through what I'd actually come here to accomplish, and I decided that the work was worth more than the reaction. Walking out would have been entirely justified. It also would have accomplished nothing except satisfying a feeling." "Most people would have left," Bradford said quietly. "Most people respond to how they're being treated," Marcus said. "I try to respond to what I'm actually trying to do. Those are different things, and they lead to different places." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Marcus stepped in and turned back. Bradford was standing in the corridor with the expression of a man who has just encountered, through the specific testimony of another person's behavior, something that requires him to revise a belief he hadn't consciously identified as a belief until this moment. "I'll have my assistant connect with Sloan about the next steps," Marcus said. Bradford nodded. The doors closed. The formal consulting arrangement between ClearPath Financial Architecture and Hartwell Private Wealth Management was agreed and signed the following month. The terms were straightforward and fair in the way that terms tend to be when both parties have a clear understanding of what the other brings. A significant advisory fee for ClearPath, paid quarterly, and a performance-linked percentage of returns generated by any infrastructure investment structures developed using ClearPath's methodology. Elaine Moss reviewed the agreement and called Marcus afterward with the particular satisfaction of an accountant whose recommendation has generated an outcome well beyond its original scope. It had begun, in the most direct possible sense, with a man sitting in a lobby for 2 hours and 35 minutes because someone had looked at his jacket and decided not to look any further. Diana was moved to an internal administrative role 3 months after Marcus's first visit. The official explanation was a restructuring of client-facing intake responsibilities, the kind of explanation that is technically accurate and leaves a great deal unaddressed. Sloan mentioned it to Marcus during one of their quarterly reviews with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they have decided not to editorialize. Marcus received it the same way. He did not celebrate it. He did not feel that what had happened to Diana was disproportionate or cruel. He simply understood it as one of the ways reality performs its own corrections when you give it sufficient time and sufficient room. Theo, by contrast, was promoted to junior relationship manager 6 months after the fourth-floor meeting. Sloan mentioned this with noticeably less neutrality. She was evidently pleased, in the way people are pleased when a good outcome has gone to someone who earned it honestly. Marcus sent Theo a brief congratulatory email. Theo replied within the hour with a message that was somewhat too long and somewhat too enthusiastic and entirely unguardedly sincere. Marcus read it twice and appreciated it more than he mentioned to anyone. There is a specific kind of satisfaction that belongs exclusively to a specific kind of patience, not the passive patience of someone who has no other option, but the active, intentional patience of someone who has clearly understood the difference between the immediate and the important, and who has made a conscious, deliberate choice to invest their energy in the latter. It is not a temperament that comes naturally to most people, and Marcus did not claim it came naturally to him. It had been cultivated, slowly, through years of working in environments where the pressure to respond to how you were being treated was constant, and the cost of yielding to that pressure was always higher than it appeared in the moment. What had held him in that cream leather chair, working steadily through his documents, drinking his coffee, observing the lobby with the interested calm of a man who finds the world legitimately informative regardless of what it is doing, was not indifference to how he was being treated. He had felt the quality of what was happening with perfect clarity. He had understood its implications. He had, in the first 30 minutes, felt the particular pull of wanting to correct the record immediately, to produce the evidence on the spot to be known in real time rather than later. The impulse was entirely human. He had simply looked at it, assessed it honestly, and set it aside, because responding to the disrespect would have made the disrespect the center of the morning, and the disrespect was not what he had come here for. The account summary he had eventually placed on Sloane's table had not been a weapon. It had not been designed as a rebuke or a humiliation or a restoration of dignity through the exhibition of a number. It had simply been the truth, produced at the moment when the truth was functionally necessary, offered without drama or flourish, allowed to do the only work it needed to do. And it had done that work with a completeness and efficiency that no confrontation in the lobby, however justified, could have approached. By the following October, 1 year to the month after he'd first walked through Hartwell's glass doors in his unremarkable gray jacket, 3 minutes early for an appointment with an advisor who was not there, ClearPath Financial Architecture had been instrumental in deploying $240 million of Hartwell-managed capital into infrastructure-linked investment structures. The first-year returns were modest, as Marcus had consistently and specifically prepared Bradford and Christine to expect. The projected returns over the full investment horizon were described by Christine Elroy in a board presentation to which Marcus had been invited as a formal advisory participant as potentially transformational for Hartwell's alternative investment division, a word Marcus noted privately that carries a particular weight when it comes from someone as precise in her language as Christine tended to be. Bradford shook Marcus's hand at the close of that board meeting with the warmth of a man who has arrived, through sustained observation rather than a single transaction, at a genuine regard. It was different in quality from the regard he had offered in the fourth-floor conference room 11 months earlier. That one had been the professional appreciation of someone who had done his research and found it impressive. This was something more personal. The appreciation of someone who has watched another person work across an extended period, in conditions that included some that were not comfortable, and has developed through that sustained observation an understanding of what they were actually dealing with that no amount of research could have delivered. "I want to ask you something I should have asked a long time ago," Bradford said, as they walked together out of the boardroom and into the corridor, the city visible through the windows in its late October configuration, the light low and golden and clean. "That first morning, when you were sitting down there in the lobby, what actually kept you in that chair?" Marcus had been asked versions of this question before, by Sloane during a candid moment over dinner at the end of their first quarter together, by Elaine Moss, who had received the story with the focused attention of someone filing it for future use, by his business partner David, who had found the whole episode by turns infuriating and quietly hilarious, and had insisted on hearing every detail twice. "I thought through what the alternative looked like," Marcus said. "If I had walked out, I would have been entirely right too. I would have had every justification available to me. And then what? I find another firm. I have another version of the same initial meeting, probably with a different set of variables, but a similar basic shape. 2 years later, I'm exactly where I am now, except I've spent 2 years carrying the weight of a morning that didn't actually cost me anything except the time I was going to spend in a waiting room anyway." "It cost you more than time," Bradford said, with a quiet directness that acknowledged what he was referring to without requiring him to name it more specifically. "The 3 hours in the lobby didn't cost me anything that mattered," Marcus said. "The work that came after them did matter. There's a difference between what's uncomfortable and what's actually significant. When I'm in a moment that's uncomfortable, I try to ask myself which category it actually belongs to. That morning, it was uncomfortable. It wasn't significant. It became significant through what I chose to do with it." He said it without accusation, without generosity, without any particular interest in how it landed. He said it the way he had sat in that lobby, directly, clearly, from a position of settled knowledge about what was true, without requiring anyone else in the room to confirm it. Because he had known, from the moment he sat down in that cream leather chair with his documents and his patience and his unremarkable gray jacket, exactly who he was. The only question had ever been when everyone else in the room would catch up. There is something worth sitting with in this story before you move on to the next thing. Marcus Chen did not wait in that lobby for 2 hours and 35 minutes because he had no power. He waited because he understood, with the clear-eyed precision of someone who has done the arithmetic on this question, that the measure of a person is not how quickly they correct a wrong impression of themselves, but what they do with the time and the clarity and the peculiar freedom that being underestimated, correctly handled, can give you. He kept his attention precisely where it belonged. He did not allow someone else's failure of perception to become a disruption in his own work, his own morning, his own life. The cost of their failure remained entirely theirs. There will always be rooms that underestimate you. This is not a temporary condition of a particular stage of your life that better credentials or more visible success will eventually resolve. There will always be rooms that look at the surface of you and make a quick decision based on what they see. The question is not whether those rooms exist. The question is whether you will be steady enough and patient enough and clear enough about your own actual value to let the truth do what the truth does, reliably, without assistance, given sufficient time. It levels everything. If this story meant something to you, if you have ever sat in your own version of that cream leather chair, doing careful work while someone nearby failed entirely to see what they were looking at, tell us about it in the comments below. We read them, and we pay genuine attention to what you bring to this space. And if you are not yet part of this community, the subscribe button is right there, and it is worth pressing. Because we will be back with more stories about patience, about the quiet cost of arrogance, and about the reliable, unhurried justice of being exactly who you are, regardless of whether the room has noticed yet. Stay with the work. The truth keeps time.